A few years ago, I was on an airplane sitting in the middle seat. I don't like the middle seat on airplanes. I call it the hot dog seat because people's buns are on either side of me. I'm sitting there, and all I wanted to do was to take a nap when this woman showed up, didn't ask me to stand up, just squeezed in front of me, had a seat next to the window, and I could tell right away that this woman had more energy than I wanted her to. She started taking things out of her bag, she was decorating her space. For anyone who wants to take a nap on a plane, space decorators are a red flag. In fact, it didn't take long for her to try to make eye contact with me while I tried to stay looking ahead. Sure enough, she taps me on the shoulder. I take out my headphone. I said, "Yeah, you need something?" She goes, "Hi, I'm Helga." I said, "Here we go." I have a 4 hour plane ride, and all I want to do is take a nap, but Helga goes after it. She starts asking me all kinds of questions. At some point, she asked me what I did for work. I told her I worked in schools. She goes, "Houston, I used to work in a school." I was like, "Awesome." She goes, "Houston, I worked at a high school. What was your favorite part? What did you love about high school?" I said, "Probably my senior year." She goes, "Why?" I'm like, "Okay, we're going to do this." I explained to her that my favorite part of high school was my senior year because at the beginning of the year, some friends and I got together and we started this club at my school called Rake, Random Acts of Kindness, etc. We bought a big wooden garden rake, that was our mascot, and once a week we got together to talk about kindness, why it was important, why the world needed more of it, why it was hard. And at the end of every meeting, after we were done talking about kindness, we would go into our school and we would try to practice kindness. And there was only two rules. Rule number one was you had to meet someone new. Rule number two, leave them better than you found them. And we talked about what does that mean? What does it mean to effectively, intentionally leave people better than you found them? I'm telling Helga the whole story. I look over, she's crying. She goes, "Houston, that is so important." I said, "Yeah, no, it was great. We met a lot of cool people. We had some fun acts of kindness." And she goes, "No, you don't understand how important that is to me." I said, "Well, you're probably going to tell me." And sure enough, she launches into the story about how the last time she was on an airplane was 3 years before her and I had ever met. She said, "Houston, the only reason I was on an airplane the last time I was because early in the morning I woke up to a phone call from my dad's doctor. Helga lives in Seattle, Washington. Her dad, Phoenix, Arizona." She goes, "Houston, I woke up to this phone call from my dad's doctor saying, 'Helga, I don't know where you're at right now, but the sooner you could get to Arizona, the better. We're taking your dad to the hospital. We're not exactly sure what's going on, but um, he's not doing real well, and I'm sure he would love to see you.'" She goes, "Houston, I didn't even pack a bag. I sped to the airport. I bought a plane ticket for 5 hours later that night. I had to wait in the airport all day worrying about my dad till finally I sit down on the plane." She goes, "Houston, I took out my phone to turn it off, to turn it on to airplane mode. And right as I'm about to turn my phone off, I get another phone call from my dad's doctor explaining that my dad had passed away. Houston, I'm on my way. I'm on my way to go and see him when I learned that I lost him. And then I had to sit next to strangers for 3 hours after getting the worst news of my life." She said, "Houston, I think I was in shock that plane ride. I didn't say a word to anyone around me. I didn't even cry. I just sat there in silence until finally we landed in Arizona. I walked off the plane, I walked up to the nearest wall, and I just fell down." She said, "Houston, you ever gotten news so bad your body stops working right? I just crumbled. I put my head in my hands and I cried harder than I've ever cried in my whole life." And Helga, she had a good sense of humor. She goes, "Houston, you should know I'm not a pretty crier. I'm not a quiet crier." She goes, "I sound like Chewbacca's choking on something. It's loud and it's aggressive." And then she looks at me. She goes, "You want to know why? Why what you're talking about is so important to me? Kindness?" She goes, "I sat in the airport that day for 2 hours, crying on what had to be the worst day of my life. And if I had to guess over the course of that 2 hours, there were probably 3,000 people in that airport around me, going to their planes or getting off their planes. Houston, 2 hours, 3,000 people. And not one, not a single person stopped." She looks at me. She goes, "You have no idea how much I could have used an act of kindness that day." It's weird. I've never talked to Helga again. We were just airplane friends. I don't even know her last name. But I think about Helga or talk about Helga, no joke, almost every day. And I don't know how you react to the story, but I know for me personally, every time I talk about it, every time I think about it, it's a little bit self-confrontational. It's one of those stories that forces you to ask yourself the question, would I stop? I know you don't know me that well, or maybe if you do, you know that I believe in kindness a lot. I have since high school, and I've spent the past 10 years of my life talking about kindness. And yet, if I was really honest, if I asked myself that question, would I stop? I think like 9 times out of 10, the answer is no. I think what frustrates me even more is if you were to ask any of the 3,000 people in the airport that day who did walk by Helga, if you were to ask them the question, do you believe in kindness? I think that all of them would say yes. So there's a gap, right? A gap between what we say is important, what we believe is important, and sometimes what we actually do for each other. We can believe in something deeply and not be very good at it. I think there's a gap in our world between what we believe is good and what we're actually good at. I'm in the hot dog seat. Helga looks at me. She goes, Houston, 2 hours, 3,000 people, not one person stopped. I'll never forget what she said next. She goes, you know what I realized that day, Houston? As I sat in the airport crying, I realized that kindness isn't normal. That it's not normal in our world to be kind. And ever since that day, I've been trying to figure out how you and I change that. And I believe that the only way that we make kindness normal in our world is to do the uncomfortable and messy and hard work of making kindness more normal in our own lives. I believe that kindness is harder than it sounds. It's more complicated than sometimes we make it out to be. And I believe, like any other muscle in our body, like any other skill we want to develop, it requires ongoing, consistent practice. It requires us to show up to the gym, even when we don't feel like it, to exercise that muscle of kindness towards people that are different than us, towards people that challenge us. It is a skill that all of us need to build, an exercise that we must practice every single day for ourselves, to be kind to ourselves, to be kind to our family, to our friends, to the strangers we haven't met yet, in order to make more kindness in our lives and make kindness more normal in this world.